SaveAways Part 2 by Christine, May the 1st, 2024. The crowd gathered around the pierhead at 5:23 p.m. It was pissing down and we were soaked wet through after having the bright idea to walk along from Toxteth. It wasn't raining when we left, but the time we got to the gates of the little turret on top of the bigger turret, the wind swooped sideways from the Mersey through the King's Dock. Intense sharp rain in the face, drenching the clothes right through. The ice cream van went past a while ago, heading towards the waterfront, playing their tune as they got close to us. They must have noticed the flashes of high vis on our attire, or maybe it was because my husband was wearing a giant panda head. He got a lot of attention that day, and it kept him dry from the rain. We gathered and danced and sang together. Some played the drums. We were all from the same tribe, all banded together in our madness and grief. The bus pulled in at the pierhead. I was sat on my hands, clenching myself to the seat, trying not to focus on the tea splashing around in my belly as we took a wide corner into the bus stop. I fixed a smile on my face so as not to have the focus shifted to my very full bladder. Tea goes through you very quickly. While I didn't want to spoil the day by being demanding, I couldn't risk wetting my pedal pushers. I looked smart when I left the house this morning. Mum had left my blouse and pedal pushers out on the side for me, all lined and smooth, with white knickers, a vest and some frilly-edged socks. Dad commented, "Sunday best," when I got dressed. But it wasn't Sunday though, it was Monday, so we didn't have to lie about going to church today. Dad took me straight into the landing terminal where the ferry embarked from, and took me to the turnstile of the toilets, waiting for an old lady to come to the gate at the same time as us. Dad took 2p out of his pocket and passed it to the old lady we had never met. She knew what to do. She stood me in front of her, put the 2p in the turnstile, and then pushed me up close to the bar, and we both poured into the public convenience together. 2 for the price of 1. I didn't feel the need to do any of my handstands in these toilets. Instead, I hovered over the seat and aimed in the general direction of the loo, just like Mum had taught me. "Do not sit on that seat," she would always remind me. She wasn't there to remind me today, but I knew it was dirty and I could not tolerate smells. I gagged at the stench and quickly pulled my sleeve down to cover my hand while I unlocked the door to get out of there and buried my chin and mouth in the ruched collar of my blouse. I washed my hands and breathed in the smell of the council soap. It was the same smell as the soap at school and every other public toilet. I pulled tongues at myself in the mirror as I rubbed my hands together, splashing the suds between both hands. I looked down, realising I'd covered myself in water from the sink. I tried to rub it dry with the cotton towel. I pulled a clean bit around, scrunched up my wet blouse and rubbed it with the towel. It didn't dry it. Now I just had scrunched and wet blouse. Oh well, I shrugged to myself in the mirror and walked on my tiptoes with my arms in the air out of the public convenience. Dad was waiting for me. He looked like he'd missed me because his smile was beaming at me as I used my belly to push the bar to get out. I was tempted to do a cartwheel then, but as I looked down at the floor, it was dirty with cigarette butts, so I decided against it, also knowing that those types of acrobatics, as Dad would call it, had no place on the street. Instead, I took giant steps with my arms in the air until I got closer to Dad. He took my hand and pirouetted me around on the spot. I bowed to him and then walked normally, or as best as I could until I tripped on a flagstone, falling to my knees. The best thing about pedal pushers, though, was that they didn't rip as I fell. Instead, just had a spot of blood on my knees from the graze. Dad took his checkered hanky out of his pocket, still folded in a square and neatly ironed, with his initials on the corner, WJF. He gave it a rub and said, "It'll be a pig's foot in the morning." We snorted and laughed. We started to walk away from the ferry terminal, at which point I asked, preparing to be disappointed, "Are we going on the ferry today, Dad?" "First I want to show you something," he replied. It was only a short walk along the pierhead to the War Memorial. We walked slowly. Dad sat us down in front of the War Memorial and put the quick save bag on his lap. He took out the sandwiches wrapped in tin foil. Some were cut in quarters in a triangle shape, and the other sandwich was cut in half, not in a triangle. He passed me one of the small triangles. I bit into it, left the crust hanging out of my mouth and smiled at Dad. He took a bite from his butty and said, "Divine." I knew he was referring mainly to the butter and not just the whole butty. Dad loved butter. I checked once by holding a buttercup under his chin, and right enough it shone golden yellow on his big, grizzly round face. He loved butter. Dad reached across and took the crust from my mouth, knowing I wouldn't eat it anyway. He checked and there was a bit of chicken still between the crust, which he took out and popped into my mouth. I said, "Amen," and swallowed. Dad finished my crust and wrapped the foil around the rest of the sandwiches. He took the lid off the Cura bottle and held it to my mouth while I took a sip. "That'll do," he said, and safely took the bottle away from me to avert any further mishaps, I presumed. Dad started towards the war memorial and began telling me a story. He asked how old I was now. "Almost 11 in 11 days, I replied. He began, "Well, when I was 7, I had a dad. He went away to sea to fight the Germans. He never came back." I felt Dad's sadness. "I was just a little boy," he said, looking up at the war memorial. Dad walked around the outside edge of the memorial. There were hundreds of names all around, and on the inside too. He found a list of names of the seamen who lost their lives on HMS Manistee and pointed to a name on the list. It was written, W. Flanagan. "William John Flanagan the first," he explained. Dad was the second, my brother the third, and I had the cutest little nephew, just 1 year old. He was the fourth. Bless him. "Did you cry?" I asked. Dad said, "No, didn't cry for years." I thought that strange, but didn't push for any clarification. I went down the list reading all the names out loud. Most of them were Irish-sounding names, so they were easy for me to read. Dad walked to the water's edge and leaned onto the poles, looking over the water at Birkenhead. He reached into his pocket and took out the small medicine bottle and popped one of the tiny tablets under his tongue. He looked exhausted. Had I worn him out already? It seemed I did that these days. We walked slowly back towards the ferry terminal and showed our SaveAways to the man at the turnstile. He let us through and pressed his little clicker twice. Dad found us a seat on the deck. The sun was shining on the water and the view of the pier head suddenly became enchanting as the boat took off. We were on the Royal Iris. I'd heard a lot about her, but this was my first time going over the water. The pier head building was huge and it didn't seem to get smaller as we moved away from the water's edge. I could see the liver birds on top from this distance without straining my neck to look up. I imagined them flying away with the other birds and then realised that would be sad if they were gone, so I flew them back. I put my arms out like wings as I stood on the deck, feeling the sway of the water beneath us. The sun shone on Dad's face as he raised his chin up and smiled, the wind catching his curls on his full head of hair. I sat backwards between his knees and let him cradle me for a minute. I rubbed my soft cheek on his spiky chin. Dad got a shave every morning, but by lunchtime he would be able to annoy me by rubbing his stubble on my face, making me giggle. It didn't annoy me today. I rubbed back and forth slowly, bobbing along on the water over the waves and looking back towards our hometown. The sound of heavy chains and a sudden bump brought me to my feet as I realised we were on the other side. We got off the ferry hand in hand, both of us looking out for things that I could potentially trip over. I smelled the most glorious of smells, one that will always remind me of my dad, engine oil. I breathed in the air and remembered the days when Dad would come home late for tea with bags of sweets and his overalls still on. I would try to intercept him at the door so I could get a cuddle while he still had the smell of engine oil on him. I loved that smell. It was warm and cosy. Number 37 of the 52 pamphlets, Gantob 2024.